Hey there guys, welcome back to the Caddy Daddy shop. Today's part 2 of our starter motor rebuild. Episode 1, we took the starter, took it apart, we found everything that was wrong with it and figured out what parts needed to be ordered. The parts are all here. So you can see we got everything laid out on the bench, and get busy here and start putting it back together. This basic design of GM starter is used in a lot of different vehicles. There's some difference in up here depending on what car it goes into, but the whole process of rebuilding it and the parts interchange for several decades, and even cross over to other makes of automobiles that use the Delco starter. So the first thing we're going to do is we got our new yoke here, and this is what goes between the solenoid core, pinned right there, pivots on the housing, and engages there, and that's what slides the pinion gear into the ring gear on the flex plate or flywheel. And this is held together with this little roll pin. And a lot of the guys will try to use a regular punch and to drive these in and out. There's an actual proper tool for it, a roll pin punch. This is the biggest one I have, and you can see that there's a little nub at the end. What that little nub will do for you is it lines up with the hole. It keeps it centered so that you're less likely to drive it crooked and deform it and cause yourself all sorts of problems. There we go. Nice thing about a little piece of wood, it drives right in so you can go get it to the right depth without bottoming out. Do it a little more. You want to get it right centered. Okay. That's going to be okay. A little bit more. A little bit flush on that side and protrude slightly that side. We'll try to see if we can even it up just a wee bit more. So this sub-assembly is ready. Now we have to put the new bushings in, both ends. Now, I didn't show getting this one out, the old one. I used a chisel. It was a rounded chisel. I believe it is for this purpose. It was in the batch of tools that I got from an older gentleman that was retiring from doing any automotive work anymore. I was able to chip the old bushing out and did not damage the inside here. So this one can be a little bit difficult. There are tools that can get in there behind it and pull it out. So just keep that in mind. That's something that I didn't show. I like to put a little lubrication in before I try to drive a bushing. When these bushings are kind of brittle, you want to be sure you get in there, keep it square. And not use too much force. One way to keep from using too much force and from damaging is use wood. Put that down a little bit more. We'll make sure that we haven't caused any damage. It's one of those things that you just, over time, you learn the feel that that's correct. So that knocked in real gentle and easy. A little lubrication, make sure there's no corrosion. Everything goes together real nice for you. Same thing here. Give it a gentle tap in. The thing when you're using wood, make sure you don't get a little sliver that comes off and gets down someplace it shouldn't. So you saw how those easily drifted in. If they don't want to go in easy, then you got something wrong. So that's all good. So that's basically the sub-assemblies, these little parts that have to be prepared before we can start putting the unit together. Something I will mention here is the brushes. The reason I have them, I took everything apart. You might not want to take everything apart all at the same time. Might want to just take one side apart and do one side at a time. The kit comes with illustrated instructions to make sure that you put things back together the way they're supposed to be, because who knows if somebody's been in there before you and has not done the job correctly. So on the brushes, you'll see that the brush is cut at an angle. This is the part that rides on the armature of the motor. The instructions in the book tell you to mount them so that the trade name shows. So GM must put, Delco or something on this side on the original. Be one way to know if it had OEM brushes when you're taking one apart. But you can see that the longer side goes towards the bracket. Same on the insulated side. This side here is longer than this side to give you, so it's allow for the angle at the end. So just remember that when you're going to put these together. That's why I put them like that now, so I could show you guys. Now we're on to the point here we can actually start to reassemble things. This drive, just to illustrate how it works, that's what engages with the flywheel. This is a one-way clutch. Something important, very important, is if you're reusing your original drive mechanism, do not soak it in solvent. Only wipe it down from the outside. There's a special grease in here for the one-way bearing. If you wash that grease out, you've ruined it. So you want to always be careful. Just clean this externally. Don't soak it in anything. This is a sealed unit, and if you wash the grease out, then you're out of luck. The instructions tell us to apply a small amount of oil on this shaft. They tell us 30 weight motor oil, and that's just standard, I think, 1030. Get it down in the grooves. So the grooves are what actually transfer the power from the motor into the drive. We're on there like that. So now we're going to be installing the parts that hold the starter drive to the armature shaft and also the thrust washer. So these are the three pieces that go on that end of the shaft. The stop collar, the stop ring, and the thrust washer. When these are assembled onto the shaft, they are in this order. This thrust washer has a shoulder on it. And it's important that that shoulder go onto the armature shaft in this direction, so that this side here contacts the housing. And I've seen these in the other way because they look like they ought to go the other way. They look like they ought to sit down in the housing like that. That's not how it goes. It goes that way. I'm just going to set this up. Put the stop ring on with there's a groove inside. Want that up. We'll put the ring on. It's difficult to get started. wrench to push on it with. Yeah. Use a socket or anything to push that down. So now we have to get it into the stop ring. Here's a washer that just fits on the shaft. We're going to use a couple of pairs of pliers. I don't happen to have a proper set of pliers here to do this with. We're going to try to do it with these two. Okay. Use regular pliers. I just didn't have the right set here at the bench. Use 2 pairs of regular slip joint pliers. That stop ring is in the groove on the shaft and in the groove of the stop ring. And to once again illustrate, that is the direction that this thrust collar goes. So that takes the force when this is thrown forward. So now we can set this assembly aside. So now we're at the point of wanting to install the brushes and the new spring and all this assembly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through here and do a dry run just to show you how these brush holders go. One of them is metal, and that one goes on the side with the wire that's grounded to the case. The plastic one goes to the side with the field windings. We gotta get everything lined up. Drop the pin. Okay. So these are free to move. So what seems to work best is to fold them up like that. Then you can slip the spring in. This one here, the metal one, has a stop. That's how that goes together. It gets a little hard to see in there when we start putting the brushes on, because then we're tethered by the wires. And so I just wanted to show you how that all fit together before we actually do it. Now you don't want to over tighten this. You want to keep this wire kind of everything square. Don't over tighten, because that brush is just made out of carbon. Now that side's done, we'll go ahead and do the other side, and we'll bring you back in a couple of minutes. Okay, so we've got the second set of brushes in. That's how everything should look in there for you. So now we can begin the reassembly of the unit. So we've got the drive end here. Put some grease on there, and I'll put a little bit on the shaft. Spread it around. We want to note that we have our thrust washer in the proper position with the shoulder facing the motor. We're going to just set that there, and then we're going to work this collar in. I should say work this yoke into the collar. You can see how that mechanism works when the solenoid pulls in. You can see the drive gear rotates on that spiral to help it find its way into the ring gear. So now the part that gets a little bit tricky, and that is to reassemble this part, because we got to push these brushes out of the way. The leads here will be on the solenoid side. There's an indexing pin. Very gently. Now watch the gap there as I wrote. You can see it fall in. Now we get a good shot here of the brushes. So you can see when I just pulled them back and just worked the armature back through. What we want to check right here is we want to see to it that the brushes, you see this one here's got a gap. So you want to inspect this area, make sure that the brushes are sitting squarely against the armature, and that the wiring there's no wiring touching any moving parts or anything grounding out that shouldn't be. And you'll have noticed too that the armature was nice and shiny when I put it in. I did turn this on my lathe. So let me correct this one brush that's not in the proper position. It's just not sitting squarely in the holder. And then I'll bring you back. We'll put the cover on and put the solenoid back on. Then we've got ourselves a rebuilt starter. So now what we're going to do is install this braking washer on this end of the shaft. Just slides on like that. I've made note. You can, on the side here, you can see this protrusion. That's where one of the cover bolts goes through. So you kind of want to pay attention to the orientation. This doesn't have an indexing pin. But the amount of force that's on the brushes, it's very difficult to get in here with your fingers and actually rotate this starter. So what you want to do is give it a little turn here. Have to use a screwdriver before you tighten everything down, just to make sure everything's turning. This isn't a real free-running, loose motor like when you've seen me work on like the antennas and such. But hard to get in there. So it does a free turn. But like I say, they are stiff, especially when new, before those brushes are broken in. So final part of the job is to mount the new solenoid. And I mentioned that at times there were rebuild kits available. These particular solenoids, there is still a rebuild kit available with the new contacts for this end housing. So if you're trying to keep all original looking, that is still possible, and rebuild what you have. Okay, everything, just double checking the fit here. And one of the things we have to do, I always like to check fits before I put any sealers or adhesives on anything. We are supposed to seal with a non-hardening sealer around this flange. Just to keep water from getting in there. Let the water kind of cascade off, I take it, is the intention. So now that we have our fit verified, notice that the solenoid has to be rotated as it's installed. we go. Rebuilt starter motor ready for action. So I've got battery down here on the floor, jumper cables hooked up. This here is basically your key. So everything seems to be working. You can see how the starter drive engages, moves forward to engage the flywheel before the motor actually starts turning. There we go. So now you guys know how to rebuild your Delco starter motor. Older ones, newer ones, very similar. Even different makes. So this is a basic procedure. The only thing that might be difficult is to get the armature turned. But it only really needs to be turned if it's real wavy. If it's still pretty smooth, you can just polish it up. Make sure that after you polish it, it's good and clean. If you got a starter that you need to rebuild for your Cadillac, Buick, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, see the link in the description below for the parts that we use today. And check our website for parts for other years. This was from a 64, but it's very representative of about 3 decades worth of GM starters. So you guys might be wondering, when we took this thing apart, we found broken spring, but we didn't find the part that was broken out of it. Why is that? Well, that's because I built this starter up out of junk parts just to demonstrate it to you guys. So I went to extra work to build a junker just for you.
At Caddy Daddy Presents, it's all about giving back. Please enjoy the video of the Boys and Girls Clubs of St. Helena and Calistoga. Donate by clicking the link in the video description.